Okay, everyone, welcome to the beekeeping session for the Racine Public Library's summer reading program. And I looked at what the theme was this year, Imagine Your Story. And I thought that might be a good place for me to start with today's presentation. I'll tell you a little bit about my story. Oh, my slide's not moving. Hang tight here, guys. There we go. Okay, so my name is Stephanie Slater. I am a beekeeper. This is my 4th year keeping bees. As you can see in the top picture, that's one of my apiaries where I have 5 colonies of honeybees. So an apiary is what beekeepers call the location where their beehives are kept. So a beehive is the house that the colony of bees lives in. Just like you live in your house, your family lives in your house, the family or colony of bees lives in a hive, which is the box that you're seeing there. So let's start out by talking about why are bees and other pollinators important? Well, first of all, a lot of the food that we eat relies on pollination. So I'm thinking about the strawberries that we're getting ready to start picking this week, and the apples that'll be coming this fall, and a lot of the other fruits and vegetables that you eat rely on pollinators, not just honeybees, native bees and bats and butterflies, and a lot of different other pollinators. But it's important to know that about 1/3 of what you eat relies on that pollination. So think about what you had for breakfast this morning and count how many bites. Maybe every 3rd bite that you took relied on a pollinator for that thing to grow. Now, some of our livestock also relies on pollination. For example, the bees and other pollinators will pollinate alfalfa, which feeds the cows, and the cows make your milk and your hamburgers. So think about how our pollinators are indirectly affecting our food source as well. There are some other things that are pretty important that we get from our honeybees specifically are products from the hive. For example, honey. We all know that honey comes from honeybees, and we know what a wonderful thing that is to eat. But there are also some other products that come from the hive, like beeswax. The bees actually produce the wax from their abdomens, and it's pretty cool. And they use that wax to form little cells so that they can raise babies and store food. So think about you putting a lid on your jar of soup. The bees will make wax cells, and they will cap it over with wax when the food is ready to store. So that's pretty cool that they can do that. There are some other products that we get from the hive as well, just maybe not as high a volume. So we will sometimes borrow some of the pollen that the bees have brought back. A lot of people like to put pollen in some of their food. And also there's something called propolis that we can get from the hive. Propolis is a resin that the bees make from tree sap, and they use it to kind of glue everything together and caulk up holes in their hive. And it can be it's antibacterial, and it's used, you'll find it in your toothpaste sometimes. And bee venom is something that does get occasionally harvested for health purposes. Sometimes people will go through some treatments either for allergies or for like things like arthritis. And so they harvest that venom from the bees in order to do that. So those are some pretty cool things that we can get from the hive. There's more than just honey going on in there. And of course, economics. The U.S. honey industry was responsible for more than 22,000 jobs in 2017, and its total economic output was, 4.74 billion. So I know there was some new data on that. I just haven't gotten the slide updated with the 2019 data, but it's probably pretty similar. So let's talk about a few fun facts about honeybees. The average worker bee lives for about 5 to 6 weeks during the summer. They work really hard gathering all of that pollen and nectar. They do live longer in the winter so that they can get through the winter and survive into spring. But during the time of 5 to 6 weeks that they're alive in the summer, one honeybee will produce 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So just think about how many bees it would take to fill 1 jar of honey if they're only producing 1/12 of a teaspoon. So they're bringing it in drop by drop, which is pretty cool. So honeybees beat their wings for over 11,000 times per minute. So that's really fast. And they actually have 4 wings, where a fly only has 2 wings. The bees can fly for about 15 miles an hour, and they have 5 eyes. So they can see much better than you and I. Those 5 eyes really help them orientate to the sun and also to watch for the flowers as they're out foraging. So a single hive can contain 60,000 or more honeybees. And see, that's why that's important, because we need all of those tens of thousands of bees to make all of that honey for them to eat as well as for us to enjoy. And in the spring and summer, especially right now, a queen bee is laying 1,500 or more eggs per day. So although the bees are dying maybe every 5 to 6 weeks, she's laying more eggs than that. So that's what helps them build up that population to have so many bees in the colony. So I know not everybody wants to be a beekeeper, and that's okay. But there are some things that all of us can do, even if we're not going to keep bees, that can help all of the pollinators out there and make sure that they stay strong and healthy, so that you have a really good food source for yourself, as well as enjoying some of those other hive products that we talked about. So first and foremost, we can eliminate pesticide use at home. Stop using all the Roundup. You don't have to kill all the dandelions in your yard. In fact, dandelions are critical for our bees in the spring. After a really long cold winter, the honeybees have probably eaten all the honey that they stored up in their hive. And when the weather starts getting nicer in April, they go out foraging for food, and those dandelions are the first meal that they get in the spring. And so it's really great if we can leave some of those dandelions in our yards for a few extra days before we mow them over, so that the bees get something to eat. So you don't have to let them go to seed, just maybe spread out your mowings a little bit and let those dandelions bloom for a couple days and get those bees something to eat. We can all plant trees and shrubs and flowers and gardens. Anything that flowers is going to help our pollinators. And think about what you're planting. When does it bloom? Try to plant things that will bloom from spring all the way to fall. You got your early spring things like your daffodils, and get all the way into fall with your goldenrod, and then everything in between. Not only is it pretty in your yard, but it really helps our pollinators. Trees are the best. If you've got room, plant some trees like linden trees or black locust trees, even willow trees. The bees can make a lot of honey, and they get a lot of pollen from sources like a tree, because there's so many blossoms. Bees like to be really efficient. They don't want to hop from flower to flower to flower. They want to take care of an entire tree over a short period of time. And so it's pretty exciting when you have those kinds of trees in your yard. And as soon as those blossoms open up and the bees find it, it's just incredible. So think about some of those things. So even if you don't have a lot of space, you can do pots of flowers, or maybe a little garden on your patio. Lots of things that you can do. You can provide water sources. Bees and butterflies do really well with trays of water, like a bird bath or something like that. But make sure you put something like a pebble or a marble in there, so that the bees and the butterflies have something to land on, so that they don't drown. One really fun project for you kids in the summer, take an old pie plate and glue some marbles in there and fill it up with water. Just don't cover the marbles, and set that out, and you'll see the bees and the butterflies come and land on those marbles to drink from your water source. So although our bees will forage for about a 3-mile radius around their hive, they're only bringing back water drop by drop, just like the nectar. So when it's really hot in July and they need to air condition their colony a little bit, let's put those water sources a little bit more close for them, so they don't have to travel so far to bring that water back. Another thing you can do is purchase local honey. Go to the farmer's market, get to know your local beekeeper. That's a great way to support a beekeeper that's already doing it, so they can continue to keep bees, as well as, keeping money in your local economy. you will find, and I will guarantee you, that if you buy honey from your local beekeeper and compare it to the honey you got at the big box store, you will notice a big difference. And the honey from your local beekeeper is much better. You will love it. It tastes great. So think about some of those things. Sometimes the honey that we see in stores maybe has been processed. It may not be 100% honey. And so you're going to notice differences. This time of year especially, we can protect swarms. So I'm going to show you a picture of a swarm in the next slide here. Now this is what a swarm looks like. It is not scary. Don't be scared. This is actually a wonderful thing. And we've been seeing swarms like this since the end of April, and we'll probably see them now through the end of June. What this means is a colony of bees was strong and healthy enough, and they decided they were outgrowing the house they were living in. So half of them decided to leave and go find a new place to live. So they stop in a cluster like this so that they can rest, and they send scout bees out looking for a new place to live, whether it's a beekeeper's empty hive that he left laying around, whether it's a hollow tree, and sometimes, unfortunately, in the walls of our house. But what you should know about a swarm is that the bees are very unlikely to sting you in this stage. They're very docile. They have full bellies of honey because they're ready to start setting up a new house to move in. So right now they're just sitting here waiting and resting and scouting out new locations. If you should see a swarm like this, please don't panic. Please don't spray them with anything. You can call your local beekeeper and they will be over lickety-split because it's free bees for us. And then we can put them in a safe hive where we can care for them as well as keep them from becoming a nuisance by going into a location that may not be ideal for our neighbors. So again, nothing to be scared of. I know it can look intimidating, but a lot of times a beekeeper, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but a lot of times a beekeeper will rehome this colony without even any protective gear on because they're that calm. And then of course the last one is you can certainly become a beekeeper yourself. Kids can be beekeepers. This young man is Fisher. He's 12 years old, and he is one of the first members of the Wisconsin Honey Producers Youth Scholar Program. This is the very first year they've been able to do this, and they provide kind of some grant funding and some mentors for some kids that are really interested in becoming beekeepers. My partner Jess and I have had the privilege of being able to work with Fisher. He's set up his first colonies of bees, and he's been doing his weekly inspections, and he's very proud here to show you in this picture that his bees have started making honey. So in that picture, that white stuff towards the top, that's what the honey looks like after the bees have capped it over with wax. So it's kind of like they put the lid on their jar. So if you are a young person that is interested in becoming a beekeeper, you might want to consider looking into the Wisconsin Honey Producers Association's Youth Scholar Program, and they're located at wihoney.org. There is an application process, and typically the recipients would be applying about this time of year, and they would be selected in November. This year, the format may change slightly due to pandemic restrictions, but that's kind of how it's set up right now. So next week is National Pollinator Week. So I was so glad to be able to throw this slide in and let you know. So in years that we don't have a pandemic, there would be tons of cool, fun activities going on throughout the whole United States, celebrating Pollinator Week, celebrating our pollinators, and doing things to support our pollinators. Unfortunately, this year there's fewer of the hands-on experiences, but each one of us can do a little something next week to celebrate our pollinators, whether it's making one of those water sources, whether it's planting some more flowers, whether it's going to the farmer's market and buying something from your local beekeeper. We can all each individually do something this year and then get ready for a really fun Pollinator Week next year. So let's talk about the different types of bees in a colony. Specifically, we're going to talk about honeybees because those are the ones I know the most about. We call this a caste system, and it's made up of queen, workers, and drones. So the queen and the workers are all female bees. The queen is the only one that lays eggs, and you can see she's the large bee here in the middle. Okay, so there's only one queen in every colony. Then there are the workers. You can see the worker bees here all circled around here. Hopefully you guys can see my cursor. They're circling around her because they're tending to her. She doesn't do anything for herself. All she does is lay eggs all day. That's how come she can get 1,500 laid in a day. So they feed her, they groom her, they take care of her. So the majority of your colony, about 90 or more % of your colony is made up of worker bees. They have a lot of work to do, so we need lots of them. They take care of the babies, they take care of the queen, they clean the hive, they guard the hive, they build the comb, they take care of the food, they do a lot of stuff inside the colony. And they do that for about the first 3 or 4 weeks of their life. And then for the last 2 or 3 weeks of their life, that's when they're out foraging and collecting nectar and collecting pollen and bringing it back into the hive. And then we have some drones. So you can see this big guy over here to the left. This is a drone. Now he is big, but he's also shaped a lot different than our queen here. The drone has his big eyes on the top of his head, and he does not have a stinger. So there's only a small percentage, maybe 5 to 10% of your colony is going to be drones. They don't do a lot to support the colony. They don't clean, they don't guard, they don't feed any babies. But we always like to have a few boys around to keep everybody harmonious. And so the drones are pretty good to have around. So let's talk about, why do bees make honey? It's not just for us to enjoy. They actually make the honey because that's what they eat. Honey is their carbohydrate. That's what gives them energy to work so hard. And pollen is their protein. And pollen specifically is what the bees feed their babies. Okay? And so man noticed many years ago that honeybees are really kind of the only insect that lives in such a large colony. We have other insects that live in colonies. We have a lot of pollinators that are solitary. There are some ants that live in huge colonies, but they don't produce something that we want, okay? But when we noticed how much honey these honeybees were producing, we started thinking about, how can we make this benefit man? And so they learned that honeybees make way more honey than what they need to sustain their colony. There are other bees out there that make a form of honey, but they only make just enough to raise a few young. They never grow to the size of a colony that a honeybee does. And so that's why honeybees are the only insect that are managed by man for food consumption. So we'll talk a little bit about the honeybee life cycle. As we mentioned, the queen starts out by laying an egg, and she lays one egg in the cell. And after about 3 days, that egg hatches out into a small larva, and it continues to grow and looks like a little white grub, and it gets bigger and bigger and fat, and it fills up that cell. After several days, that larva then starts to turn into a pupa, and you can see that it's starting to look a little bit more like a bee. Just like a butterfly, you guys are familiar with the metamorphosis process, where the caterpillar spins a cocoon and then emerges as a butterfly, and honeybees have a very similar process. So after, I forget how many days, I don't know, 10 days or so, that pupa is capped over, kind of like a cocoon, and it continues to develop under that capping, and then it emerges as a full-grown adult. So a worker bee, from the day it's laid as an egg till it emerges, is 21 days. A drone takes a couple days longer, 24 days, and a queen grows, even though she's big, she grows really fast because they feed her something special called royal jelly. And she emerges after 16 days. And they build her a special cell because she's so big. So here are the parts of a hive. Again, that's the house that the colony of bees lives in. And you'll see there are several different types of hives. I can only speak to this kind of hive. This is the kind that I use, and it's pretty much what most beekeepers in Wisconsin use, but we do have some that try some other variations. But we start out with a bottom board, and we move up to some boxes. These bottom boxes, if you notice, are a little bit bigger than this top box. These bottom boxes, we call those brood boxes, and this is where they raise their babies. And up above this smaller box, We call this a honey super, and that's where they store their honey. They like to store their excess honey above where they're raising the babies so that they can get to it to feed the babies. They also store some honey around the frames as well, so it's really close. So you can see this picture here. Inside those boxes are frames all lined up. And what's nice is the beekeeper can pull those frames out and look at them. We can look at how healthy our colony is. We can make sure there's no diseases. We can make sure that they're storing enough food away, all those kind of things that we need. So the bees do a really good job of taking care of themselves, but we're kind of farmers for bees. And so we have to provide them a little bit of support and help them out, because honeybees are not native to our country. They were brought here by the settlers many years ago. And so, you know, it's our obligation they have a right to be able to live in a well-managed and healthy environment. So this is the pretty much standard setup that you'll see most beekeepers in the state of Wisconsin. So some of you might be asking, well, how do I get started beekeeping? Well, that's a really good question. The first step you'd want to do is to join a local club. Almost every county in our area has a beekeeping club. In fact, the Racine, Kenosha beekeepers, they meet on the first Wednesday of each month at 7:00 p.m. They meet at the Kenosha County Building at Highways 50 and 45 in Bristol, and it's only $10 a year to join. And that's that way for many other county beekeeping associations as well. And the benefit of joining a bee club is so that you can meet other like-minded individuals. They help you learn about which books are really good to read to learn how to get started as a beekeeper. They'll let you know about classes that are taking place. You'll find that in February and March, there are lots and lots of classes for beginner beekeepers, because that's the time of year that we get started for the season. We recommend taking a lot of classes. Beekeeping, there's a little bit of research and knowledge that comes with it. It's a little bit more involved than taking care of your cat or your dog at home. So you definitely want to learn about it before you buy your first colony of bees. And when you join a club, a lot of times you'll end up meeting somebody that you get along with really well that's been keeping bees for a few years, and they might be willing to mentor you. And there's nothing better than going out and learning hands-on from a mentor. You can go out and help somebody work their hive so that you learn how to do it when yours come. And we recommend, you know, read. I'm sure the library has some great books on beekeeping, or they can help you find some resources for that. There's some great beginner books. We really try to encourage brand new beekeepers to avoid YouTube as much as possible in the beginning until you get smart enough to know what's good and maybe what's not so good. And there's a lot of really good books out there with proven research and information, whereas YouTube, you know, really anyone can post a video, but it may not always be what's right. And what's really important too is recognizing what region some of those videos are being recorded in. How we keep bees in Wisconsin is very different than how we keep bees in Florida. Florida doesn't have snow and ice and some of the factors that we have to deal with. And so our management practices are going to be very different. So if I'm watching a video from a guy in Florida that's putting his brand new bees into a box and he's spraying them with water or sugar, here it's below freezing sometimes. We wouldn't want to do that. So again, we got to think about what we're watching. So really start out by reading some good books, and I know the library has some great resources for you. You can also purchase and assemble your equipment. You're going to want to do that before your bees arrive in April. It's kind of like when the baby comes home from the hospital, you got to have the crib all set up and ready to go. You have to have the car seat already in the car. Most of the beekeeping equipment is wood, and it comes to you pre-cut, but you have to assemble it and paint it, and all of that takes time. We usually order our new bees to arrive. We order them around January or so, and then they arrive in April. And usually they're shipped here from Georgia or California. There's a few other places, but being a member of a local club, a lot of times they'll have like a big bulk order where they'll order a whole truckload of them, and you'll be able to, just go to your club meeting location and pick up your bees from there. There are some other resources. Some suppliers will even ship them through the U.S. mail, but I'll tell you that your postman isn't real hip on that. So sometimes you might want to try to find some more local distributors. But really what's most important is to have fun. Beekeeping is really fun. It can be hot and you might have to lift some heavy boxes, but it's a different kind of work. It's a fun kind of work. It's really enjoyable. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to try it out. So we'll spend just a couple of minutes to talk about harvesting honey. A lot of people want to know, when do we harvest honey? How do we get it in the bottle? Those kind of things. So here in Wisconsin, I will tell you that our bees have started making honey here in June, and they're storing a little bit away right now. There's not a lot to put in the bottles just quite yet, but through June and July is when we make most of our honey here in Wisconsin, based upon the types of blossoms and blooms that are available out there. And so right around the beginning of August, I try to shoot for the first week in August. I will go pull those honey super boxes off, and I'll get all the bees to leave them. And we pull these frames out. And then what we do is we take a knife and we cut that wax capping off. We save that for later. We can make candles and lip balm and things like that. But after we take the wax capping off, that exposes the honey. And we put it in this spinner. We call this an extractor. And we take that handle and we spin the honey out, and the honey goes flying out, and then it rolls down the bottom. We have a little spout here, and we'll put a bucket down below. And from that bucket, then we bottle the honey up. We have a little strainer that we use to get any big chunks of wax out. But other than that, we don't process the honey. We don't heat the honey. We make sure that it has all the good things in it. Once you heat honey, it loses some of those really healthy nutrients and enzymes in there. And so we want to make sure that it's as raw and as possible. In fact, I have to tell you guys, yesterday I was out working my bees, and there was a little bit of honeycomb in a spot that really I didn't want it to be. It was kind of in the way. So I scratched a little bit off, and I got to eat the honey right in the honeycomb. And I'll tell you, that's the best way to do it. And that's as natural as you can get. So that's pretty much my presentation. I know I went through it pretty quickly, but I wanted to try to cover some of the most popular topics and where some of the questions come from. But I can stick around for a few minutes. I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to pull up the chat and see what we have for questions. And so feel free to type some questions in. Oh, good. So there is a link in the chat box now with some great resources for books about bees for kids. And in fact, so Amber and Elizabeth asked about what the name of the youth beekeeping opportunity was. And it's the Wisconsin Honey Producers Association, and they're located at wihoney.org. So I threw that in the chat, and it's the youth, what do they call it? The Youth Beekeeping Scholar Program or Mentor Program, something like that. We tend to throw a couple different terms around. I am going to do one thing too. I have a great YouTube video that I want you guys to watch on your own time. It's too long to show here during this presentation, so bear with me while I pull up the link. This is about a 14-minute video. Hang on, let's get the link. But I watched this yesterday, and I thought it was really well done. And in fact, they got Leonardo DiCaprio to narrate it. So I thought, oh, that was pretty cool. So I'm going to throw this link in here. So if you want to copy it and paste it in your browser, then you can watch it after our presentation is over. So other than that, does anybody have any other questions about beekeeping, becoming a beekeeper? Anything like that that I can answer? Oh, so Emily here has a good question. What type of honeybees do you have? So there's a few different races of honeybees that we that tend to do really well in our region. And so when you order your bees, sometimes they'll ask, do you want an Italian bee? Do you want a Carniolan bee, a buckfast bee, a Russian bee? There's quite a few different to choose from. So I have a few of each actually. I'm currently managing 11 colonies since I have nothing better to do this summer and everything's canceled. I just got more bees instead. So I have some Italian bees, some Carniolan bees, and some buckfast bees. And they all kind of, you know, they do all the same work, but they might do it just a little bit differently than each other. Some of them do handle winter a little bit better. Some of them build up a little bit more quickly in population. But really the bottom line is they all do kind of the same thing. What we recommend to a brand new beekeeper is to start out with either an Italian race or a Carniolan race. They tend to be a little bit more docile and gentle, and so that really helps you build your comfort level with the bees. Sometimes, and I don't want to pick on the Russian bees, but sometimes they can be a little bit more protective of their hive. So bees don't want to sting, and bees are not aggressive on purpose like your yellow jackets might be. A honeybee will only sting if it's protecting its hive, if it feels like its hive is in danger. And a honeybee does die once it stings, so that's its last resort. But sometimes they can be a little more temperamental than others. And I hate to say it, you know, even some of my other animals, one day they can be calm and friendly and nice, and another day they're just a little grumpy. And sometimes that has to do with what's going on outside. If it's a cloudy day or a rainy day, or if it's chilly out, the bees like it nice and warm. So sometimes there's those factors that just make them a little bit more temperamental than others. So Luke asked if bees sleep at night. So I don't know the answer to that question because I've seen it mentioned both ways, that bees never sleep, but then I've seen some other research that says that the bees do sleep. What I can tell you is that during the winter, they do not hibernate. A lot of people ask what our bees in Wisconsin do over the winter. They stay in their hive and they cluster up. They form a cluster where that queen is protected in the middle. Okay, the colder it is, the tighter the cluster. And what they do is the outside bees kind of form a shell. And so there's bees in between there that are shivering their wing muscles, and they're generating heat. And so they're eating that honey that they've stored away, and they're creating heat to keep warm. The bees don't need to keep it at 90 degrees if they're not raising babies, and we call that brood. They don't need to keep it 90 degrees if they're not raising brood, kind of like a chicken has to sit on its eggs and keep it warm for it to hatch. Well, the bees have to do the same thing. So they stop raising brood in the winter, but they'll slowly start raising some more brood, maybe around February and March, so that they have a good start for the spring. They don't sleep then, but sometimes if you look inside the hive during the winter and it's really cold, they're like in super slow motion. So they're in there and they're awake and they're working and moving, but it's super slow motion because they're trying so hard to stay warm. Do you need certain training to be a beekeeper? So in the state of Wisconsin, there is no requirement for any certification. However, other states do. The state of Wisconsin also does not require you to register your hives or your colonies with any state or federal agency, but there are other states that do. For example, in Illinois, you have to register your colonies. Illinois has some tax breaks for beekeepers, Wisconsin does not. So it's very, very different. And that actually brings up a really good, another point that I should make with you is that as you're thinking about becoming a beekeeper, you really need to think about where you live. The first part of that is knowing what your ordinances are. Every single municipality has different ordinances. Whether you live in the city or the township or on agriculturally zoned land, you know, how close can you be to the property line? How, you know, do your neighbors have to give you permission? Every municipality is different, and some of them simply have an ordinance that bees cannot be kept in the city limits. Some don't mention it in the ordinance. And some will say, yes, you can have this many, but if you live in the city, you can, these are your restrictions. So knowing that and abiding by that is critical. If you live in an area that the ordinances don't permit for beekeeping, there are some resources out there that you can work with your local government to have those ordinances changed. I know personally individuals that were instrumental in changing the ordinances in the city of Delavan and the city of Elkhorn, where before they weren't able to keep colonies, and now they can keep a few colonies if they live in the city. So although the state doesn't require licensure or registration, the municipalities have restrictions on the ability to keep bees on your property, depending upon where you live. But although it's not a requirement to be certified, I think the most successful beekeeper, especially starting out, will have taken an introduction to beekeeping class, will have read some books, will have found a mentor, and really kind of built a good foundation of what to expect and what you're getting into before those bees arrive. So it's more of a recommendation, like, take a few classes so that you're successful, because it can be heartbreaking if your bees don't live, and especially if you found out it's because they starved or they froze, because those are things that you can do, that you can prevent and you can do to help support the bees. So I hope that answered your question. I don't see any new questions up there. Oh, thanks for the comment, Charlotte. I'm glad the kids liked it. That's great. I do really enjoy having these talks with kids. It's kind of a bummer I can't see everybody and I can't be there, because I'd be passing around bees and I'd be passing around honeycomb, and we were going to have honey sticks and cool stuff like that. So, okay, the best thing that kids like to hear about when I do talk to them about bees is they really like to keep their hive clean. They probably keep their hive cleaner than I keep my house. So thinking about that, so a bee hive is the most hygienic habitat in nature. So the bees don't poop in their hives. I always got to tell the kids about that. So when the bees need to poop, they actually fly outside and they do what we call, oh, I just blanked out on the word, a cleansing flight. Sorry. They go on a cleansing flight. And so in the winter time, when they can't fly, if it's below 40 or 50 degrees, they have to hold it. So we really like it when there's a little break in the weather in February or even January where it's over 40 and the bees can fly out to poop. So anyway, kids like to have that poop conversation, so I forgot to add that one in. But with that, I'll watch for maybe another minute and see if any new questions come in. Otherwise, I will stop the recording. I will share this with the library, and I wish you all a great, sweet summer, and plant some more flowers and provide some water sources, and no more Roundup, okay? Okay, with no new questions coming in, I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to end the video. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.